Chapter 1. The invitation to Blackthorn Manor. The autumn of 1932 was unseasonably chilly, and Hercule Poirot, ensconced in his London flat, found solace in the precise arrangement of his morning routine. The silver teapot gleamed on the table. The toast was cut to exact proportions, and the air carried the faint scent of lavender polish. Yet, as he adjusted his perfectly knotted tie, a faint restlessness stirred within him. The little grey cells, they demanded exercise. It was at this moment that the post arrived, delivered with a soft thud by his ever-efficient valet, George. Among the usual letters, a bill from the tailor, an invitation to a tedious society function, was an envelope of thick cream-coloured vellum, sealed with a wax crest depicting a thorn-encircled rose. Poirot's eyebrows arched as he examined it. The address was written in a bold, elegant hand, but bore no sender's name. "Mon Dieu, what is this?" he murmured, slicing the envelope open with a silver letter opener. The contents were brief, yet intriguing. "My dear Monsieur Poirot, your reputation as a man of discretion and unparalleled intellect precedes you. I humbly request your presence at Blackthorn Manor, Sussex, for a weekend gathering, commencing this Friday. A matter of utmost delicacy requires your attention, though I dare not commit details to paper. A car will collect you at 3 p.m. Pray, do not disappoint. Yours sincerely, a friend." Poirot's mustache twitched. A friend, yet one who hides their name. This is not the work of an amateur, but of one who knows the value of mystery. He turned the letter over, noting the postmark, a small village in Sussex, scarcely a dot on the map. The crest, too, was unfamiliar, though its craftsmanship suggested wealth and tradition. He summoned George, who appeared with the silent efficiency of a shadow. "George, what do you know of Blackthorn Manor?" George, ever prepared, paused only briefly. "A fine old estate, sir, near the village of Thorn, owned by the Ashburn family, though I believe it's now in the hands of Sir Reginald Ashburn, a reclusive sort. Not much in the society pages, sir." "Reclusive, you say? Interessant." Poirot tapped the letter against his chin. "And yet, this Sir Reginald, or perhaps another, invites Hercule Poirot to a gathering, a matter of delicacy, no less. Bean, I shall go. The little grey cells, they are curious." By Friday afternoon, Poirot stood outside his flat, immaculate in a charcoal overcoat and polished shoes, his walking stick tapping lightly on the pavement. Precisely at 3, a sleek black Daimler rolled to a stop. The driver, a taciturn man, with a face like weathered oak, tipped his cap but offered no name. Poirot settled into the leather interior, noting the faint scent of pipe smoke lingering in the air. The journey to Sussex was a study in contrasts. The bustling streets of London gave way to rolling hills, their greens muted by the encroaching dusk. As the car wound through narrow lanes, Poirot's mind churned. Why the anonymity? Why the urgency veiled in such careful words? The crest of the thorn-encircled rose danced in his thoughts, a symbol both beautiful and forbidding. At last, the car turned onto a gravel drive, flanked by ancient oaks. Blackthorn Manor loomed ahead, its Elizabethan facade a tapestry of ivy and weathered stone. The windows glowed faintly, as if reluctant to reveal the secrets within. The driver opened the door, and Poirot stepped out, his sharp eyes scanning. The scene. Butler, stiff as a marionette, awaited at the entrance. "Monsieur Poirot, I presume?" the butler intoned, his voice as crisp as the evening air. "I am Carstairs. Welcome to Blackthorn Manor. The other guests are assembling in the drawing-room." Poirot inclined his head. "Merci, Monsieur Carstairs, and my host." Carstairs hesitated, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "Sir Reginald will join you shortly, if you'll follow me." As Poirot stepped into the grand hall, the air grew heavy with the scent of old wood and wax. A chandelier cast fractured light across a portrait-lined wall, each face stern and watchful. The atmosphere was one of opulence, yet it carried an undercurrent of restraint, as if the house itself held its breath. In the drawing-room, a fire crackled, casting shadows over a group of figures who turned as one to regard him. There was a young woman in a sapphire dress, her fingers twisting a pearl necklace, a gaunt man with a military bearing, his eyes darting, a matronly figure clutching a fan, her smile too tight, and a young man with a poet's dishevelled charm, lounging with studied nonchalance. Each nodded politely, but their greetings were curt, their eyes guarded. "Bonsoir," Poirot said, his voice warm yet probing. "I am Hercule Poirot, It is a pleasure to be among such intriguing company." The young woman offered a fleeting smile. "Eleanor Vance," she said, her voice soft but strained. "We weren't told you'd be joining us, Mr. Poirot, Nan. And yet, here I am." Poirot's eyes twinkled, but his mind was already at work, cataloguing their faces, their hesitations. "Perhaps our host enjoys surprises." A heavy silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Poirot sensed it, then a current of unease. A shared secret, unspoken invitation had promised a matter of delicacy, but this gathering felt like a stage set for something far darker. As Carstairs announced dinner, Poirot's gaze lingered on the group. The little grey cells were awake, and they whispered of danger. Blackthorn Manor, with its silent walls and guarded guests, was a puzzle. And Hercule Poirot, he did not like puzzles to remain unsolved. One chapter done, and the mystery has only just begun. Tell me, dear listener, where in the world are you joining us from? Leave your city below, and subscribe now, because the next chapter may hold the first real clue. Chapter 2. The silent gathering. The drawing room of Blackthorn Manor was a study in opulence, its walls draped in damask, and its heavy oak furniture polished to a mirror-like sheen. The fire in the grate cast flickering shadows, illuminating the faces of the gathered guests in a way that made their expressions seem both vivid and elusive. Hercule Poirot stood just inside the threshold, his small, precise frame a stark contrast to the grandeur around him. His eyes, bright and unyielding, scanned the room, cataloguing every detail. The faint tremor in a hand, the averted glance, the too careful posture of those who stood or sat in uneasy silence. Carstairs, the butler, had retreated after announcing dinner, leaving Poirot to observe the company. There were 5 guests besides himself, each a distinct thread in the tapestry of this enigmatic gathering. Eleanor Vance, the young woman in the sapphire dress, stood near the fire, her delicate fingers still twisting her pearl necklace as if it were a lifeline. Her auburn hair was swept into an elegant chignon, but a stray curl betrayed a nervous energy. Beside her, the gaunt man with the military bearing, introduced as Colonel Marcus Rutherford, stood ramrod straight, his moustache bristling as he sipped a glass of sherry with mechanical precision. Across the room, the matronly woman, Mrs. Lavinia Hargreaves, clutched a feathered fan, her plump cheeks flushed despite the chill. Her eyes darted toward the door, as if expecting an unwelcome arrival. The young man with the poet's air, Julian Fairchild, sprawled in an armchair, a cigarette dangling from his lips, his dishevelled cravat a deliberate defiance of the room's formality. And finally, a quiet figure in a corner, Dr. Evelyn Sinclair, a woman of middle years with sharp features and spectacles, who watched the others with the detached curiosity of a scientist studying specimens. Poirot's moustache twitched as he absorbed the scene. Mon Dieu, he thought, this is no ordinary gathering. Each one here, they carry a weight, a secret kept close. But what binds them, and why am I among them? He stepped forward, his patent leather shoes silent on the Persian rug, and addressed the room with a genial smile. "Bonsoir encore, mes amis," he said, his voice smooth as velvet. "It is a rare pleasure to find oneself in such distinguished company, and yet, I confess, I am curious. Our host, Sir Reginald Ashburn, he is not yet among us. Perhaps one of you might enlighten Hercule Poirot as to the nature of this retreat." A ripple of discomfort passed through the room. Eleanor Vance's fingers tightened on her necklace, snapping a pearl loose. It fell to the floor with a faint clatter. Colonel Rutherford cleared his throat, his voice gruff. "Hardly the place for questions, Mr. Poirot. Sir Reginald will explain. Himself, when he arrives, always does things on his own time. That one, does he, indeed?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And yet, to invite a detective such as myself, it suggests a purpose, Nan. A matter of delicacy, perhaps." Mrs. Hargreaves fanned herself vigorously, her laugh high and brittle. "Oh, Mr. Poirot, you do have a way of making things sound so dramatic. I'm sure it's just a social gathering. Sir Reginald is fond of his little eccentricities, isn't he, Julian?" Julian Fairchild exhaled a plume of smoke, his hazel eyes narrowing. "Eccentricities, that's one word for it. The old man's got a knack for stirring the pot, I'll give him that. But I'm here for the wine and the chance to escape London's dream, nothing more." Dr. Sinclair adjusted her spectacles, her voice cool and measured. "And yet, Mr. Fairchild, you seem remarkably tense for a man seeking merely wine and respite." One might wonder what brings you here in truth. Julian's lips curled into a smirk, but his fingers tightened on his cigarette. Careful, Doctor. Not everyone's as fond of prying as you are. Poirot tilted his head, his mind cataloguing the exchange. The hostility was subtle, yet palpable, like a current beneath still waters. He turned to Eleanor, who had retrieved the fallen pearl and was clutching it tightly. Mademoiselle Vance, you have been to Blackthorn Manor before. Perhaps you can tell me of our host's habits. Eleanor's eyes flickered, her voice barely above a whisper. I've only visited once, years ago. Sir Reginald is kind, but he's private. He doesn't always explain his reasons. She glanced at the others, as if seeking permission to continue, but none met her gaze. Interessant, Poirot murmured. A host who is private, guests who are guarded. It is a puzzle, is it not? But Hercule Poirot, he enjoys a puzzle. Before anyone could respond, the double doors swung open, and Carstairs reappeared, his face impassive. Dinner is served in the dining room, if you please. The group moved as one, their movements stiff, as if reluctant to break the fragile equilibrium of the room. Poirot followed, noting the layout of the manor, the grand staircase curving upward, the portraits of stern-faced Ashburns glaring down, the faint creak of floorboards underfoot. The dining room was no less imposing, its long mahogany table set with crystal and silver, candles casting a warm but flickering light. A seventh place was set at the head of the table, presumably for Sir Reginald, but it remained empty. As they took their seats, Poirot observed the careful arrangement. Eleanor sat beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Colonel Rutherford was opposite, his posture rigid, while Mrs. Hargreaves fussed with her napkin, her chatter filling the silence with forced cheer. Julian lounged at the far end, his eyes half-lidded but watchful, and Dr. Sinclair sat across from him, her gaze dissecting the room with clinical precision. The first courser consomme served with delicate precision arrived, and Poirot seized the moment to probe further. Madame Hargreaves, he began. You spoke of Sir Reginald's eccentricities. Might you share an example? It would help me to understand my host. Mrs. Hargreaves hesitated, her fan pausing mid. Well, he's always been fond of surprises, invitations out of the blue, that sort of thing. Last year, he hosted a weekend and insisted we all play charades until midnight. Quite exhausting, really. Charades, Poirot repeated, his tone light but his eyes sharp. And yet, this time, no such games are proposed. Only a matter of delicacy, as my invitation suggested. Do any of you know of this matter? A heavy silence descended, broken only by the clink of spoons against porcelain. Colonel Rutherford coughed, his voice clipped. If there's a matter, it's Sir Reginald's to disclose, not ours. Dr. Sinclair's lips twitched, as if suppressing a smile. The Colonel is right, Mr. Poirot. Some things are best left to the host, though I confess, I'm as curious as you are. Poirot sipped his consomme, his mind racing. The reticence was not merely social. It was deliberate, a collective effort to conceal. But what and why invite a detective, unless the truth was meant to be uncovered or hidden further? As the meal progressed, the conversation remained stilted, punctuated by Mrs. Hargreaves' nervous anecdotes and Julian's sardonic quips. Eleanor barely spoke, her eyes fixed on her plate, while Colonel Rutherford answered in monosyllables. Dr. Sinclair, however, watched Poirot with an intensity that suggested she was studying him as much as he studied her. The main pheasant with a Madeira sauce was served when a distant sound broke the tension, a heavy thud, like a door slamming shut, followed by a faint, muffled cry. The guests froze, their eyes darting to one another. Eleanor's fork clattered to her plate, and Mrs. Hargreaves gasped, her fan falling to the floor. What was that? Julian demanded, his nonchalance gone. Carstairs appeared at the door, his face pale but composed. A minor disturbance, sir. A servant, perhaps, in the upper rooms. I shall investigate. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Nan, Monsieur Carstairs, if it is all the same, Hercule Poirot would prefer to see for himself. A sound so curious, it must not be dismissed. The butler hesitated, then nodded. As you wish, sir. This way. As Poirot rose, the guests exchanged glances, their silence louder than ever. The little grey cells were alight, sensing the first thread of the mystery unravelling. Blackthorn Manor was no mere retreat. It was a stage, and the play had just begun. Chapter 3. A whisper in the dark. The air in Blackthorn Manor grew heavier as Hercule Poirot followed Carstairs through the dimly lit corridors, the echo of that strange thud and muffled cry lingering in his mind. The butler's stride was measured, his face an impenetrable mask, but Poirot noted the slight tightening of his jaw, sign, perhaps, of unease. The other guests had remained in the dining room, their silence as oppressive as the manor's ancient walls. Poirot's little grey cells buzzed with anticipation. Something was amiss, and he was determined to uncover it. The corridor twisted past tapestries faded by time, their scenes of hunts and feasts barely discernible in the flickering light of sconces. The manor seemed to breathe secrecy, its creaking timbers and shadowed corners whispering of hidden truths. Carstairs led Poirot up a narrow staircase to the upper floors, where the air was cooler, tinged with the musty scent of old books and wax polish. It was likely a servant. "Monsieur," Carstairs said, his voice steady but clipped. "A clumsiness, nothing more. The staff are preparing the rooms for the night." Clumsiness. Poirot's moustache twitched. A thud, a crythes, are not the sounds of a dropped tray. "No, Monsieur Carstairs, there is something here that demands the attention of Hercule Poirot." Carstairs inclined his head, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of reluctance. "As you say, sir." "This way." They reached a landing lined with heavy oak doors, each carved with the same thorn-encircled rose that had adorned Poirot's invitation. The butler gestured toward a door at the far end. The sound came from the east wing, near the guest quarters. Before they could proceed, a low murmur reached Poirot's ears, like a breeze rustling through leaves. He raised a hand, signaling Carstairs to pause. The sound came again, voices, hushed and urgent, from behind a partially open door just off the landing. Poirot's eyes gleamed. He stepped silently closer, his small frame blending into the shadows. "You mustn't speak of it," a voice whispered, sharp with panic. It was a man's voice, cultured but strained. "If it comes out, we're all finished. The price is too high." A second voice, softer and feminine, replied, "But it's gone too far. I can't keep silent anymore, not after what happened. You know what they'll do. They'll do nothing if you hold your tongue." The man hissed, "Pay it, and it ends. Refuse, and the truth will ruin us all." Poirot's heart quickened. Blackmail, voila, the word hung in the air, unspoken yet unmistakable. He edged closer, his ears straining to catch every syllable, but the voices dropped lower, swallowed by the manor's oppressive silence. Then, a rustle of fabric, a soft click, and the conversation ceased. The door remained ajar, revealing only darkness within. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, his mind racing. "A secret, a price, a threat. This is no ordinary weekend, Nan." He turned to Carstairs, who stood rigid, his face betraying nothing. "Monsieur Carstairs, who occupies that room?" Carstairs hesitated, his fingers twitching at his sides. "That is, unassigned, sir. A spare room, used for storage. No guests are quartered there." Vehement. Poirot's tone was light, but his eyes were sharp as a blade. "And yet, voices emerged from a room unassigned. Most curious. I shall investigate." "Sir," Carstairs began, but Poirot was already moving, his polished shoes silent on the polished floor. He pushed the door open, revealing a small, cluttered room, a desk piled with dusty ledgers, a chair overturned, and a single window half-shuttered against the night. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of ink and old paper. Poirot's gaze swept the space, noting the faint scuff marks on the floor, as if someone had moved hastily. "No one is here," Carstairs said, his voice a touch too quick. "Nan." Poirot agreed, but his fingers brushed the desk, where a single sheet of paper lay askew, its edge torn. He lifted it, revealing a fragment of handwriting. "Demand 10,000, or the truth." The rest was missing, ripped away. Poirot's mustache quivered. "A fragment, but it speaks loudly. Someone was here, Monsieur Carstairs, and they spoke of a price." The butler's face remained impassive, but his eyes darted to the door. "Perhaps a servant, sir, as I said. I'll have it looked into." Poirot smiled, a small, knowing curve of his lips. "We do that." But Hercule Poirot, he does not wait for others to look. He sees. He pocketed the fragment, his mind already piecing together the puzzle. Blackmail, a secret shared by multiple parties, and now a disappearance. The little grey cells were alight. They returned to the landing, but, as they descended the staircase, Poirot's thoughts churned. The voices, had he recognized them? The man's tone had a familiar cadence, perhaps Colonel Rutherford's clipped authority, or Julian Fairchild's lazy drawl. The woman's voice was softer, harder to place. Eleanor Vance, perhaps, or Dr. Sinclair. And why had they fled so quickly? The Manor's silence seemed to mock him, holding its secrets just out of reach. Back in the dining room, the guests were as Poirot had left them, though the atmosphere had grown tauter, like a violin. Strings stretched to breaking. Eleanor Vance's hands trembled as she sipped her wine, her eyes fixed on the table. Colonel Rutherford stared into his glass, his knuckles white. Mrs. Hargreaves chattered about the weather, her voice high and forced, while Julian Fairchild lit another cigarette, his smirk gone. Dr. Sinclair alone seemed composed, her sharp gaze meeting Poirot's as he entered. "Well, Mr. Poirot," she asked, her tone coolly inquisitive, "did you find the source of our little disturbance?" Poirot took his seat, his movements deliberate. "A disturbance, oui, but not so little. A sound, a cry, and now, a mystery. Tell me, Mies Amos, have any of you visited the East Wing this evening?" A chorus of denials followed, too quick, too uniform. Eleanor's glass clinked against her plate, and Mrs. Hargreaves' fan snapped shut. Colonel Rutherford muttered something about the Manor's age, while Julian scoffed. "What's in the East Wing? Dusty relics and cobwebs, I'd wager." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his voice soft but piercing. "And yet, dust can hide footprints, and cobwebs can conceal secrets. I wonder, what is it that you all fear to speak of?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Mrs. Hargreaves laughed, a brittle sound, and changed the subject to the dessert course. But Poirot's eyes missed nothing. The glance exchanged between Eleanor and Dr. Sinclair, the way Colonel Rutherford's hand lingered near his pocket, the faint tremor in Julian's cigarette, the fragment of paper burned in Poirot's mind. Its words a key to the Manor's secrets. As the meal concluded, Carstairs announced that Sir Reginald had sent word. He was delayed, but would join them by morning. The guests murmured their disappointment, but Poirot sensed relief in their faces. The absence of their host prolonged the silence they all seemed to cherish. Retiring to his room, Poirot sat at a small writing desk, the fragment of paper before him. He traced the torn edge, his mind replaying the whispered conversation. 10,000, or the truth. A blackmail demand, but for what? And why had the speakers vanished into the Manor's labyrinthine halls? The thorn-encircled rows, the guarded guests, the absent hostel were pieces of a puzzle, and Poirot was determined to fit them together. As he extinguished the lamp, the Manor settled into an uneasy quiet, broken only by the distant creak of a floorboard. Someone was still awake, moving in the shadows. Poirot smiled into the darkness. "Patience, Hercule *, he thought. "The silence will speak, and the truth will not remain hidden." Chapter 4. The body in the library. The night at Blackthorn Manor had settled into a restless hush, the kind that amplifies every creak and whisper. Hercule Poirot, though retired to his room, had not slept. His mind churned with the fragments of the evening, the whispered conversation in the East Wing, the torn note hinting at blackmail, the guarded faces of the guests, the little grey cells. They were restless, urging him to seek the truth hidden in the Manor's oppressive silence. It was shortly after midnight when a piercing scream shattered the quiet, echoing through the stone corridors. Poirot was on his feet in an instant, his dressing gown tied with precise haste, his walking stick in hand. The scream had come from the lower floors, sharp and feminine, laced with terror. He stepped into the hallway, where doors were already opening, and sleepy, anxious faces peered out. Eleanor Vance, her auburn hair loose, and her face pale as moonlight, clutched the doorframe of her room. "What was that?" she gasped, her voice trembling. "Calm, mademoiselle," Poirot said, his tone steady but urgent. "We shall discover the cause. Stay close." Colonel Rutherford emerged next, his military bearing intact, despite his rumpled pyjamas, followed by Mrs. Hargreaves, her nightcap askew, and her eyes wide with fear. Julian Fairchild appeared, a cigarette already lit, his expression a mix of curiosity and unease. Dr. Evelyn Sinclair was last, her spectacles slightly askew, but her demeanour calm, almost clinical. The scream had come from the direction of the library, a room Poirot had glimpsed earlier, its shelves heavy with leather-bound tomes and its air thick with the scent of old paper. As the group hurried down the grand staircase, Carstairs met them, his face ashen, a lantern trembling in his It's in the library, sir," he stammered, his usual composure frayed. "One of the maids found something dreadful." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Along why, Monsieur Carstairs, lead the way." The library was a cavern of shadows, its tall windows admitting only slivers of moonlight. The air was heavy with the musty scent of books and the faint tint of something metallic. A young maid, barely more than a girl, stood near the door, sobbing into her apron. Carstairs raised his lantern, and the light fell upon a scene that froze the group in their tracks. Sprawled across a Persian rug, near a massive oak desk, lay Colonel Marcus Rutherford. His eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, his mouth slightly agape, and his hands were splayed at his sides, as if reaching for something just beyond grasp. A dark stain spread across his shirt front, but there was no weapon. No sign of a struggle, only an eerie stillness that seemed to mock the room's silence. Mrs. Hargreaves gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh, merciful heavens! He's dead!" Eleanor swayed, clutching Poirot's arm for support. Julian exhaled a plume of smoke, his voice low. "Well, that's a turn. Poor old soldier." Dr. Sinclair knelt beside the body, her fingers probing with professional detachment, while Poirot's sharp gaze swept the scene, cataloguing every detail. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, stepping closer. "A death so sudden, so silent. And yet the Colonel, he was with us not 2 hours ago. C'est curieux." He turned to Dr. Sinclair, who was examining Rutherford's neck. "Madame, what do you observe?" Dr. Sinclair adjusted her spectacles, her voice steady. "No visible wounds beyond this bloodstain, which suggests a puncture, perhaps a blade, but it's oddly precise. No signs of struggle, no bruises, no torn clothing. His pupils are fixed, and rigor is just beginning. He's been dead less than an hour." Poirot nodded, his mind racing precise. "But a wound, so small, yet fatal, and no weapon in sight. This is no accident, Nan. This is murder." He turned to the maid, who was still trembling. "Mademoiselle, you found him. Tell me, what did you see?" The maid, her voice choked with sobs, stammered. I came to check the fire, sir. It was my last duty before bed. I saw him lying there, and I screamed. I didn't touch nothing, I swear." Calm, Poirot soothed. "And was the door locked when you entered?" She shook her head. "No, sir. It was ajar, like someone left in a hurry." Poirot's mustache twitched. He moved to the desk, where a single candle had burned low, its wax pooling on a leather blotter. Beside it lay a fountain pen, its nib stained with ink, and a sheet of paper with a few scrawled words. "The price is paid." The handwriting was jagged, unlike the elegant script of the blackmail fragment Poirot had found earlier. He slipped the paper into his pocket, his eyes darting to the guests. "Miss Amiss," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. "This is a grave matter. Colonel Rutherford has been murdered, and the killer, they are likely among us. I must ask, where were you all in the last hour?" A chorus of protests erupted. Mrs. Hargreaves claimed she was in her room, brushing her hair. Eleanor stammered that she had been reading, unable to sleep. Julian admitted to smoking in the conservatory, alone. Dr. Sinclair said she had been writing letters in her room. Carstairs vouched for the staff, insisting they were in the servants' quarters, though Poirot noted his quick glance toward the door. "Vraiment," Poirot said, his tone mild, but his eyes piercing. "And yet, a man is dead, and no one saw anything. The silence of Blackthorn Manor, it speaks loudly. None." He knelt beside the body, his fingers brushing the Colonel's pocket. A faint bulge revealed a silver cigarette case, engraved with his initials, but nothing else. No blackmail note, no clue to connect to the whispered conversation. Dr. Sinclair rose, her expression grim. "The wound suggests a thin blade, perhaps a letter opener or a surgical tool, but without the weapon, it's hard to say more." Poirot's gaze flicked to the desk, where the fountain pen lay. "A letter opener, you say? Interessant, and yet none is here." He turned to the group, his voice firm. "This room, it must be sealed until the police arrive. Carstairs, see to it, and no one leaves the manor." Mrs. Hargreaves gasped. "The police?" "But Sir Reginald is not here," Poirot interrupted, his tone sharp. "And until he appears, Hercule Poirot takes charge. A murder has been committed, and the truth, it will not remain silent." As Carstairs ushered the guests back to their rooms, Poirot lingered in the library, his eyes scanning the shelves, the rug, the shadows. The note in his pocket, "The price is paid," echoed the whispered words from the East Wing. "Pay it, and it ends." Was Rutherford the blackmailer, silenced for his demands, or the victim of another's secret? The absence of a weapon, the open door, the precise wound, all were pieces of a puzzle, and Poirot's little grey cells were alight with possibilities. He stepped to the window, peering into the moonlit grounds. A shadow moved near the oak trees, fleeting but deliberate. Someone was out there, defying the Manor's isolation. Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. The game, it begins. Asterisk, he thought. And Hercule Poirot, he does not lose. The library's silence pressed against him, but it was no longer empty. It whispered of secrets, of prices paid in blood, and of a truth that waited, just beyond the shadows, for Poirot to uncover. Chapter 5. The weight of secrets. The morning after Colonel Rutherford's murder dawned grey and heavy. The sky over Blackthorn Manor cloaked in mist that pressed against the tall windows like a living thing. Hercule Poirot stood in the morning room, a smaller, less ostentatious space than the library, its walls adorned with faded watercolors of pastoral scenes. A fire crackled in the grate, but it did little to dispel the chill that clung to the Manor, the chill of suspicion that hung over its guests. The police had been summoned, but the remote location meant a delay, and Poirot had seized the opportunity to begin his inquiries. The little grey cells, they were restless, hungry for the truth hidden behind the guests' guarded silences. Poirot had requested to speak with each guest individually, and Carstairs, ever the dutiful butler, had arranged for them to meet him. Here, one by one, the room was furnished with a small writing desk, a pair of armchairs, and a tea tray set with porcelain cups. Their delicate clink, the only sound as Poirot prepared his questions. He adjusted his tie, his moustache perfectly symmetrical, and settled into an armchair. His notebook opened before him. The fragment of the blackmail note, "Demand 10,000, or the truth," and the scrawled message from the library, "The price is paid," lay heavy in his mind. Twin clues to a puzzle that grew more complex by the hour. First to enter was Eleanor Vance, her sapphire dress replaced by a sombre grey frock, her auburn hair pinned tightly. Her hands twisted a handkerchief, and her eyes, red-rimmed, avoided Poirot's gaze. "Monsieur Poirot," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "this is all so dreadful. Poor Colonel Rutherford." "Oui, mademoiselle. It is most tragic," Poirot said, his tone gentle but probing. "But you were much distressed last night. Tell me, what was your acquaintance with the Colonel?" Eleanor hesitated, her fingers tightening on the handkerchief. I hardly knew him. We met once, years ago, at a charity ball in London. He was a friend of Sir Reginald's, I believe." "Raymond." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And yet, your reaction to his death, it suggests more than a passing acquaintance. Perhaps you shared a secret, something that weighs upon you." Her cheeks flushed, and she shook her head vehemently. "No, nothing like that. I was just shocked. Who wouldn't be?" But her eyes darted to the door, and Poirot noted the tremor in her voice, like a note struck off-key. "Bean," he said, making a note. "And last night, after dinner, you were in your room, reading, you said. Did you hear anything unusual before the scream? A voice, perhaps, or a footstep?" "Nothing," she said quickly, too quickly. "I was engrossed in my book. I heard nothing until the maid screamed." Poirot smiled, a small, knowing curve of his lips. "Mercy, Mademoiselle Vance. You may go, but rest assured, Hercule Poirot will speak with you again." Next came Mrs. Lavinia Hargreaves, her plump figure swathed in a mauve dress, her feathered fan replaced by a lace shawl. She sank into the armchair with a dramatic sigh, her eyes wide with theatrical distress. "Ooh, Mr. Poirot, what a nightmare. To think, a murder in this house. I shan't sleep a wink." "Madame, your concern, it is most understandable," Poirot said, his voice soothing. "But tell me, what was your connection to Colonel Rutherford? You spoke of Sir Reginald's eccentricities last night. Did the Colonel share such traits?" Mrs. Hargreaves fanned herself with her hand, a nervous gesture. "The Colonel, oh, he was a stern sort, always barking orders, as if we were his regiment. I knew him only through Sir Reginald's gatherings. He was respectable, I suppose, but not terribly sociable." "Interessant," Poirot murmured. "And yet, you seemed most anxious last night, even before the body was found. Was there something you feared?" Her laugh was high and brittle. "Feared? Why, only the usual things, drafts, bad dreams, That sort of nonsense. I'm a nervous creature, Mr. Poirot. Always have been. Poirot's pen scratched across his notebook. And after dinner, you were in your room, brushing your hair. You heard nothing, no voices, no footsteps. Nothing at all, she said, her eyes fixed on her lap. I was quite alone. Alone, eh? Poirot's tone was mild, but his gaze was sharp. Mercy, Madame Hargreaves, that will be all for now. Julian Fairchild sauntered in next, his dishevelled charm undimmed by the morning's grim events. He lit a cigarette, exhaling a plume of smoke, and sprawled in the armchair with deliberate nonchalance. Well, Poirot, you've got your work cut out for you. A murder in a locked manor sounds like one of those penny dreadfuls. Perhaps Monsieur Fairchild, Poirot said, undeterred by the young man's flippancy. But life, it is often more complex than fiction. Tell me, what was your relationship with Colonel Rutherford? Julian shrugged, his eyes half-lidded. Didn't have one. Met him a few times at Sir Reginald's shindigs. He was a bore always droning on about his war days. Not my sort, Nan. Poirot leaned forward. And yet, you were tense last night. Your cigarette. It trembled when we heard the cry. What troubles you, monsieur? Julian's smirk faltered, but he recovered quickly. Trouble. Only the boredom of this place. I was in the conservatory, smoking, as I told you. Didn't hear a thing until the scream. Poirot made a note, his eyes never leaving Julian's face. And this conservatory, it is near the library. Now you heard nothing, no voices, no struggle. Not a peep, Julian said, but his fingers flicked ash onto the rug. A small betrayal of nerves. Dr. Evelyn Sinclair was last, her sharp features composed, her spectacles glinting in the firelight. She sat with the precision of a scientist, her hands folded in her lap. Mr. Poirot, she said, her voice cool, I assume you're seeking motives. I assure you, I had none. Colonel Rutherford was a colleague, nothing more, a colleague. Poirot's eyebrows arched. C'est intéressant. In what capacity, madame? She hesitated, a rare crack in her composure. We corresponded on matters of military medicine. He consulted me on treatments for old war injuries. Nothing significant veriment. Poirot's tone was soft, but his eyes were like needles. And yet, a man is dead, and you, a doctor, noticed the precision of his wound. Tell me, did you hear anything last night, perhaps in the East Wing, where voices spoke of secrets? Dr. Sinclair's lips tightened. I was in my room, writing letters. I heard nothing until the scream. Poirot nodded, his pen pausing. Mercy, madame, your clarity, it is most helpful. As Dr. Sinclair left, Poirot leaned back, his mind a whirl of impressions. Each guest had denied hearing the whispered conversation, yet their silences spoke volumes. Eleanor's trembling hands, Mrs. Hargreaves' forced cheer, Julian's calculated nonchalance, Dr. Sinclair's guarded precision, all were threads in a tapestry of deceit. The Colonel's death, with its precise wound and cryptic note, was no random act. It was tied to the blackmail fragment, to the voices in the dark, to the absent Sir Reginald. Poirot rose, his gaze lingering on the misty grounds beyond the window. The police would arrive soon, but he did not need their methods. The little grey cells, they would unravel this mystery. The guests' secrets weighed heavy, but Hercule Poirot would lift that weight, revealing the truth beneath their silence. Chapter 6. The Missing Letter. The morning mist clung to Blackthorn Manor like a shroud, muffling the world beyond its ancient walls. Hercule Poirot stood in the library, where Colonel Rutherford's body had been found the previous night, now removed by the staff under Carstairs' supervision to await the police. The room was sealed, as Poirot had ordered, but he had returned at first light to examine it further, his little grey cells humming with questions. The fragment of the blackmail note, demand 10,000, or the truth, and the scrawled message, the prices paid, were pieces of a puzzle, but another piece was missing, and Poirot sensed it was the key to unlocking the manor's secrets. The library was unchanged from the night before. The Persian rug bore faint traces of the Colonel's blood. The oak desk stood sentinel with its burned-down candle, and the shelves loomed with their silent tomes. Poirot's sharp eyes scanned the scene anew, noting the precise arrangement of objects. The fountain pen, its nib still stained, lay exactly as he had left it, but something nagged at his mind, a detail out of place. He approached the desk, his fingers brushing the leather blotter. Beneath it, he had glimpsed a corner of paper during his initial inspection, but he had left it undisturbed. intending to examine it with the police. Now, as he lifted the blotter, his moustache twitched in dismay. The paper was gone. Only a faint crease remained, as if it had been whisked away in haste. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, his voice low but sharp. "A letter, perhaps the very one that spoke of blackmail, and now it has vanished. This is no coincidence, Nan. Someone seeks to silence the truth." He knelt, examining the floor for traces of the thief's passage. A faint scuff mark, barely visible, led toward the window, where the heavy drapes hung slightly askew. Poirot parted them, revealing a latch that was unfastened, though the window remained closed. Interesting, he thought. Someone entered or left, but the window, it was not used for escape. A ruse, perhaps. The sound of footsteps interrupted his thoughts. Carstairs appeared at the door, his face as composed as ever, though his eyes flickered with unease. "Monsieur Poirot, the police have been delayed by the fog. They will not arrive until midday. The guests are in the morning room, as you requested." "Mercy, Monsieur Carstairs," Poirot said, rising. "But tell me, this room was sealed last night. No one entered after we left." Carstairs nodded, his posture rigid. "I locked the door myself, sir, and kept the key. The staff have been instructed to stay clear of Raymond." Poirot's tone was mild, but his gaze was piercing. "And yet, a piece of evidence, it is missing. A paper, perhaps a letter, that was beneath this blotter. You saw nothing? No one near the library?" Carstairs' jaw tightened. "No, sir. I was in the servants' quarters, ensuring the staff remained calm. If someone entered, they did so without my knowledge." Poirot nodded, but his mind catalogued the butler's hesitation. Bean summoned the guests to the drawing-room. "Hercule Poirot has questions." The drawing-room was as opulent as ever, its fire casting a warm glow that did little to thaw the tension among the guests. Eleanor Vance sat by the window, her grey frock blending with the mist outside, her hands still clutching her handkerchief. Mrs. Lavinia Hargreaves fussed with her shawl, her chatter subdued but incessant. Julian Fairchild leaned against the mantel, his cigarette smoke curling upward, his eyes watchful. Dr. Evelyn Sinclair sat with her hands folded, her spectacles glinting as she observed the room with clinical detachment. Sir Reginald Ashburn remained absent, his delay now a looming question in Poirot's mind. "Mise amiss," Poirot began, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "A grave development has occurred. A piece of evidence, a letter, perhaps, has vanished from the library. This letter, it may hold the key to Colonel Rutherford's murder. I must ask, did any of you enter the library after we left last night?" A chorus of denials rose, sharp and immediate. Eleanor's voice trembled. "I was in my room, Mr. Poirot. I couldn't bear to go near that place again." Mrs. Hargreaves gasped, her shawl slipping. "The library? Heavens, no. I was asleep, or trying to, with all this dreadful business." Julian exhaled a plume of smoke, his tone sardonic. "What's this, Poirot? Playing detective with us?" "I was in the conservatory again, smoking. Didn't fancy a midnight stroll through a murder scene." Dr. Sinclair's lips twitched. "I remained in my room, as I told you. Writing the library held no interest for me." Poirot's eyes narrowed, his moustache quivering slightly. "Raymond, and yet, a letter is gone, and the room was locked. Someone, they were clever, Nan, but Hercule Poirot, he is cleverer." He paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. "This letter, it may have spoken of a secretaire, secret worth killing for. Tell me, Mise Amos, what do you know of blackmail?" The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Eleanor's handkerchief tore slightly, a faint rip echoing in the silence. Mrs. Hargreaves' chatter ceased, her eyes wide. Julian's cigarette paused midway to his lips, and Dr. Sinclair's fingers tightened in her lap. The room seemed to hold its breath. The fires crackled the only sound. "Blackmail," Mrs. Hargreaves squeaked, her voice high. "What a notion! Why, I've never heard such a thing in this house." Poirot's gaze swept the group. "And yet, I heard whispers last night, in the East Wing, speaking of a price to be paid, of a truth to be hidden. Colonel Rutherford, he was part of this, perhaps he demanded, or perhaps he paid. And now, a letter that might reveal this truth is gone." Eleanor's face paled, her voice barely audible. "I don't know anything about a letter, I swear it." Julian scoffed, but his eyes were wary. "You're spinning tales, Poirot. Whispers, letters, what next? Ghosts?" Dr. Sinclair leaned forward, her tone measured. "If there was a letter, Mr. Poirot, its absence suggests someone here is desperate, but accusing us without proof is unwise." Poirot smiled, a small, knowing curve of his lips. "Proof, Madame Hercule Poirot, does not accuse without reason. The little grey cells, they see what others miss. A scuff mark by the window, a latch undone, a letter vanished. These are not accidents. Someone in this room, they know more than they say." The tension thickened, the guests exchanging glances that were both guarded and accusing. Poirot turned to Carstairs, who stood by the door. "Monsieur Carstairs, you are certain no servant entered the library?" "Certain, Sir Carstairs," replied, his voice steady but his eyes flickering. "The staff were accounted for all night," Poirot said, though his mind noted the butler's unease. "Then it is one of you, or perhaps our absent host, Sir Reginald. His absence, it is most curious. Nan, a host who invites a detective, then fails to appear." Mrs. Hargreaves clutched her shawl. "Sir Reginald will explain everything when he arrives. He must, perhaps," Poirot said, his tone soft but unyielding. "But until he does, Hercule Poirot will continue to ask questions, and the truth, it will not remain silent." As the guests dispersed, their faces etched with unease, Poirot lingered, his gaze fixed on the fire. The missing letter was no mere theft. It was a calculated move to obscure the motive behind Rutherford's death. The whispered conversation, the torn fragment, the scrawled note all pointed to a secret shared among the guests, a secret worth killing for. And yet, the silence of Blackthorn Manor was beginning to crack, and Poirot's little grey cells were ready to prise it open. Chapter 7. Shadows of the past. The mist outside Blackthorn Manor had thickened by midday, cloaking the estate in a ghostly veil that seemed to mirror the secrets within. Hercule Poirot stood in the morning room, his small, precise frame silhouetted against the window, his notebook open on the table before him. The missing blackmail letter, the whispered conversation in the East Wing, and the cryptic note, "The prices paid," formed a constellation of clues, but the pattern remained elusive. Colonel Rutherford's murder was no random act. It was rooted in a past that the guests, with their guarded silences, were desperate to conceal. Poirot's little grey cells were alight, seeking the thread that tied the present to the shadows of history. The police were still delayed, their arrival hampered by the fog, and Sir Reginald Ashburn remained absent, his silence as perplexing as the guests. Poirot had resolved to probe deeper, to uncover the Colonel's past and its connections to the Manor's inhabitants. He had requested the guests' presence in the drawing room, but first he sought answers from the Manor itself. Carstairs had reluctantly provided access to a small study where Sir Reginald kept personal records, a room tucked behind the library, its door hidden by a tapestry of a thorn-encircled rose. The study was cramped, its air heavy with the scent of leather and dust. Shelves groaned under the weight of ledgers and correspondence, and a portrait of a stern-faced man, presumably an Ashburn ancestor, glared down. Poirot's fingers traced the spines of the ledgers, his eyes catching a volume labeled Guests and Accounts, 1910 à 1920. He pulled it down, its pages brittle but intact, and began to read. A memory stirred, not his own, but pieced together from the ledger's entries and the fragments of conversation he had overheard. In 1915, during the Great War, Blackthorn Manor had served as a convalescent home for officers under Sir Reginald's patronage. Colonel Marcus Rutherford, then a major, had been among the wounded, his leg shattered by shrapnel. The ledger noted his stay, alongside a young nurse named Clara Vancellenor's mother, perhaps, and a visiting doctor, Evelyn Sinclair, whose expertise in trauma was praised. Another entry mentioned a Captain Julian Fairchild, a distant cousin of the current Julian, dismissed from service under vague circumstances. Mrs. Lavinia Hargreaves appeared as a benefactress, funding the Manor's wartime efforts. The connections were tenuous, but Poirot's mind seized upon them. Flashback, Blackthorn Manor, autumn 1915. The library was brighter then, its windows open to a crisp autumn breeze. Major Marcus Rutherford, his face gaunt but resolute, sat in a wheelchair, his bandaged leg propped before him. Clara Vance, a nurse with auburn hair and gentle eyes, adjusted his dressings, her touch steady but her expression troubled. "You mustn't speak of it, Major," she whispered, glancing at the door. "If Sir Reginald learns the truth, it'll ruin us all." Rutherford's jaw tightened, his voice low. I saw what I saw. Clara, that Officer Fairchild, he's no hero. Selling supplies to the enemy, pocketing the profits. I'll report him, mark my words." Clara's eyes filled with fear. "And what of the others? They'll drag us down with him. Think of my daughter Eleanor, she's only a child. Promise me you'll stay silent." Dr. Evelyn Sinclair entered, her sharp features softened by fatigue. "Major Clara's right. Silence is the only way. Fairchild's actions implicate us all. Sir Reginald's funds, my treatments, your recovery. If you speak, the scandal will destroy this place." Rutherford's fists clenched. "And let a traitor walk free. I'll pay any price to see justice done." Mrs. Lavinia Hargreaves, then a younger woman, bustled in, her voice bright but strained. "Oh, Major, do be sensible. Sir Reginald trusts us. If this comes out, we'll lose everything. Our reputations, our futures. Promise you'll keep quiet." The memory faded, but its echo lingered in Poirot's mind. A scandal, a promise of silence, and now, years later, a murder. The ledger confirmed the names, but a page was torn out, its jagged edge a silent accusation. Poirot's moustache twitched. Mon Dieu, a secret buried in time, but not forgotten. The Colonel, he broke his promise. And someone ensured he paid the price. He returned to the drawing room, where the guests awaited, their faces a gallery of unease. Eleanor Vance sat by the fire, her hands still twisting her handkerchief. Mrs. Hargreaves fanned herself, her chatter subdued. Julian Fairchild lounged with a cigarette, his eyes wary. Dr. Sinclair sat erect, her spectacles glinting. Poirot's presence seemed to tighten the air, their silences louder than words. "Mies Amos," Poirot began, his voice smooth but commanding. "The past, it has a way of reaching into the present. Colonel Rutherford, he was not a stranger to Blackthorn Manor. In 1915, during the war, he was here, as were others connected to this house. A scandal, perhaps, bound you together. Tell me, what do you know of this time?" Eleanor's face paled, her voice a whisper. "I was a child then. My mother, she worked here, as a nurse, but I know nothing of a scandal." Mrs. Hargreaves gasped, her fan snapping shut. "The war? Oh, Mr. Poirot, that was ages ago. I helped fund the convalescent home. Yes, but it was all above board. Such a dreadful time, best forgotten." Julian exhaled a plume of smoke, his tone sharp. "What's this, Poirot? Digging up old war stories? My cousin was here then, got himself in a mess, but that's ancient history." Dr. Sinclair's lips tightened. "I was a visiting doctor, Mr. Poirot, treating the wounded. Colonel Rutherford was a patient. There's nothing more to say, Nan." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And yet, a page is torn from the Manor's records, just as a letter vanished from the library. The past, it is not so easily erased. A secret of betrayal, perhaps, was buried here. Colonel Rutherford, he threatened to reveal it. And now he is dead." The room grew still. The fires crackled, the only sound. Eleanor's handkerchief tore, a soft rip that echoed like a gunshot. Mrs. Hargreaves' fan trembled, and Julian's cigarette paused mid-air. Dr. Sinclair's gaze met Poirot's, unflinching but guarded. "Blackmail," Poirot continued, his voice soft but unyielding. "A price demanded, a truth threatened. The Colonel, he was part of this. None. Perhaps he demanded payment, or perhaps he refused to pay. Tell me, who among you knew of this secret?" Denials came swiftly, overlapping in a chorus of protest. Eleanor stammered, "I know nothing of blackmail." Mrs. Hargreaves cried, "This is absurd." Julian scoffed, "You're chasing ghosts, Poirot." Dr. Sinclair said coolly, "You have no proof, only speculation." Poirot smiled, his moustache quivering. "Proof, madame. Hercule Poirot sees what others miss. A torn page, a missing letter, a whispered conversation. These are not speculation. They are the shadows of a truth you all fear. And the little grey cells, they will bring it to light." As the guests dispersed, their faces etched with fear and suspicion, Poirot lingered, his notebook open. The scandal of 1915, a traitor's actions, a promise of silence had resurfaced, and Rutherford's death was its consequence. But who had acted? The missing letter, the torn page, the precise wound all pointed to a careful hand, one that knew the Manor's secrets and sought to keep them buried. Outside, the mist swirled, and Poirot glimpsed a figure near the oak trees, fleeting as a ghost. Sir Reginald's absence loomed larger, a puzzle within a puzzle. The shadows of the past were closing in, but Hercule Poirot would not let them hide the truth. Chapter 8. The Sound of Suspicion. The fog enveloping Blackthorn Manor had begun to lift by early afternoon, revealing glimpses of the estate's sprawling grounds, but within its walls, the atmosphere grew denser with suspicion. Hercule stood in the drawing-room, his small frame a beacon of calm amid the storm of unease that crackled among the guests. The missing blackmail letter, the torn ledger page, and Colonel Rutherford's murder formed a web of secrets, and Poirot's little grey cells were alight, sifting through the guests' guarded words and nervous glances. The police were still hours away, delayed by the Manor's isolation, and Sir Reginald Ashburn's continued absence cast a shadow as dark as the crime itself. The guests had gathered reluctantly, summoned by Poirot's request, their faces etched with fatigue and fear. Eleanor Vance sat on a velvet settee, her grey frock crumpled, her hands twisting a fresh handkerchief, the torn one discarded. Mrs. Lavinia Hargreaves perched on an armchair, her mauve dress clashing with her pallor, her chatter replaced by a nervous fidgeting with her shawl. Julian Fairchild leaned against the mantel, his cigarette smoke curling like a question mark, his eyes darting between the others. Dr. Evelyn Sinclair sat erect, her spectacles reflecting the firelight, her expression a mask of cool detachment. Carstairs hovered near the door, his butler's composure strained by the weight of the morning's revelations. Poirot paced slowly, his polished shoes silent on the Persian rug, his hands clasped behind his back. "Mies Amos," he began, his voice smooth but commanding. "The silence of Blackthorn Manor, it grows louder with each hour. Colonel Rutherford is dead, a letter is missing, a page torn from the past, and yet you all guard your secrets, as if silence will protect you. But Hercule Poirot, he hears what is not said, and today I hear suspicion." Mrs. Hargreaves gasped, her shawl slipping. "Suspicion? Oh, Mr. Poirot, how dreadful! We're all respectable people here, surely." "Respectable," Madame Poirot's moustache twitched. "Respectability, it is a fine mask, but it does not hide the truth. Colonel Rutherford, he was part of a scandal in 1915. A scandal that touched you all, in this very house. And now, accusations, they begin to stir." Eleanor's head snapped up, her voice trembling. "Accusations? I've done nothing wrong. I was only a child then. My mother's the one who knew the Colonel, not me." Julian exhaled a plume of smoke, his tone sharp. "Oh, come off it, Eleanor. You're not as innocent as you play. Your mother was thick as thieves with Rutherford, and you've been jumpy since we arrived. What are you hiding?" Eleanor's cheeks flushed, her eyes flashing. "How dare you? You're the one skulking about, Julian. I saw you near the library last night, before the scream. What were you doing there?" Julian's smirk faltered, his cigarette pausing mid-air. "Skulking? I was smoking, as I told Poirot. You're grasping at straws, darling." Dr. Sinclair adjusted her spectacles, her voice cutting through the rising tension. "Enough, both of you. Accusing each other won't help." "But Mr. Poirot, I must point out," Mrs. Hargreaves was awfully quick to dismiss the idea of blackmail. "Perhaps she knows more than she lets on." Mrs. Hargreaves squeaked, her hands fluttering. "Me? Why, that's preposterous. I funded the convalescent home out of charity, nothing more. I've no secrets." Dr. Sinclair, unlike some who deal in questionable medicines, Dr. Sinclair's lips tightened, but before she could retort, Poirot raised a hand, his eyes gleaming. "Calm, Mies Amos. The accusations, they fly like arrows, but they reveal much. Each of you points to another, yet none speaks of themselves. Let us consider the facts. Colonel Rutherford, he was murdered with a precise wound, no weapon. Found a letter, it vanishes from a locked room. A page, torn from a ledger, hints at a scandal. And all of you, you were here in 1915, or connected to those who were." He turned to Eleanor, his tone gentle but probing. "Mademoiselle Vance, your mother, Clara, she nursed the Colonel. Did she speak of a secret, perhaps of a betrayal involving Captain Fairchild?" Eleanor's hands stilled, her voice barely audible. She never spoke of it directly, but she was afraid, always looking over her shoulder. "She told me once to stay away from Blackthorn Manor, that it held shadows best left undisturbed. I thought she meant the war." Poirot nodded, his gaze shifting to Julian. "Monsieur Fairchild, your cousin, the captain, he was dismissed in disgrace. What do you know of his actions?" Julian's eyes narrowed, his voice cold. He was a fool, got caught up in some black market nonsense, paid for it with his career. But that's got nothing to do with me or Rutherford's death. Nan Poirot's eyebrows arched. And yet, you were seen near the library, as Mademoiselle Vance says. And your cigarette, it trembles now, as it did last night. Julian flicked ash onto the rug, his smirk returning but strained. You're barking up the wrong tree, Poirot. I'm no killer. Poirot turned to Mrs. Hargreaves, his voice soft but unyielding. Madame, your generosity in 1915, it was admirable. But did it conceal a truth? Did you know of Captain Fairchild's dealings, or the Colonel's silence? Mrs. Hargreaves' face reddened, her voice shrill. I knew nothing. I gave money, to help the wounded. That's all. You can't possibly think I'd be involved in murder. Dr. Sinclair spoke before Poirot could respond, her tone icy. Mrs. Hargreaves, your hysterics are telling. And Mr. Poirot, if you're looking for motives, consider this. Colonel Rutherford consulted me about his old war injury recently. He was agitated, hinting at a debt unpaid. Perhaps he was the blackmailer, not the victim. The room fell silent, the accusation hanging like a storm cloud. Poirot's eyes gleamed, his mind cataloguing every gesture. Eleanor's clenched fists, Mrs. Hargreaves' trembling hands, Julian's forced nonchalance, Dr. Sinclair's calculated calm. The sound of suspicion was deafening, yet it masked the truth. He sought intercessant, Poirot said, pacing slowly. A blackmailer, or a victim of blackmail away, Colonel Rutherford was a threat. And someone, they ensured his silence. But the letter, it is gone, and the ledger, it is incomplete. The truth, it is close, but it hides behind your silences. He paused, his gaze sweeping the group. I ask you now, who among you was in the East Wing last night? I heard voices, speaking of a price, a truth to be hidden. Speak, or the little grey cells, they will find you out. No one answered, but their silences spoke volumes. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Mrs. Hargreaves' shawl slipped to the floor. Julian's cigarette burned to a stub, and Dr. Sinclair's fingers tightened on her chair. Carstairs, at the door, shifted slightly, his eyes avoiding Poirot's. Bean, Poirot said, his voice soft but firm. You choose silence, but it will not protect you. Hercule Poirot sees the smallest details. A glance, a tremor, a lie, and the truth, it will not remain hidden. As the guests dispersed, their faces taut with fear and mistrust, Poirot lingered, his notebook open. The accusations had revealed fractures, but no confessions. The scandal of 1915, the missing letter, the Colonel's death hour were linked, and the guests' silences were their shield. But Poirot's little grey cells were relentless, and the sound of suspicion was guiding him closer to the truth. Outside, the fog had lifted, revealing the stark outlines of the oak trees. A figure moved briefly near the gate, too distant to identify. Sir Reginald's absence loomed larger, and Poirot wondered if the host's silence was the key to the Manor's deadly secrets. Chapter 9. The locked room riddled. The afternoon light filtered weakly through the tall windows of Blackthorn Manor, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward the secrets buried within its walls. Hercule Poirot stood in the drawing-room, his notebook open, his little grey cells buzzing with the weight of the clues accumulated. Colonel Rutherford's murder, the missing blackmail letter, the torn ledger page, and the guests' accusations, each veiled in a silence that spoke louder than words. The police were still hours away, delayed by the Manor's isolation, and Sir Reginald Ashburn's absence remained a puzzle within the puzzle. The air was thick with suspicion, and Poirot sensed the mystery was about to deepen. A sudden commotion broke his reverie, a sharp cry from the upper floors, followed by the thud of running feet. Carstairs appeared at the door, his face pale, his butler's composure shattered. Monsieur Poirot, come quickly. It's Miss Vance. She's been attacked in her room. Poirot's moustache twitched, his eyes narrowing. Mon Dieu, another incident. Along Ingui, lead the way, Monsieur Carstairs. He followed the butler up the grand staircase, the other guests trailing behind, their faces a mix of shock and fear. Eleanor Vance, Mrs. Lavinia Hargreaves, Julian Fairchild, and Dr. Evelyn Sinclair moved as a reluctant entourage, their whispers filling the corridor with a nervous hum. They reached Eleanor's room in the East Wing. Its heavy oak door closed but unlocked. Carstairs pushed it open, revealing a scene of disarray. A chair overturned, a mirror cracked, and Eleanor Vance slumped on the floor near her bed, her grey frock torn at the shoulder. Her auburn hair was disheveled, and a faint bruise bloomed on her cheek. She was conscious, her eyes wide with terror, clutching a torn piece of fabrica dark wool, not her own. Mademoiselle Vance Poirot knelt beside her, his voice gentle but urgent. "What has happened? You are hurt. Speak. Si vous plaît." Eleanor's voice trembled, her words halting. I was resting. The door was locked. I swear it. I heard a noise, like someone trying the handle, and then it burst open. A figure. They struck me, tore my dress. I fought back, grabbed this. She held up the fabric, her hands shaking. Then they fled. I don't know who it was. It was too dark. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he took the fabric, noting its coarse texture and a faint scent of tobacco. Interesting. A locked room, yet an intruder enters. And this fabric, it is a clue. He turned to Carstairs. "You are certain the door was locked?" Eleanor nodded weakly. "I locked it myself after lunch. I was afraid." After the Colonel's death, Carstairs shifted, his eyes darting to the door. "The lock is intact, sir, but it's an old mechanism. Perhaps it was forced." Poirot examined the lock, his fingers tracing its brass surface. No scratches, no signs of tampering. "Nan, this lock was not forced. A key, perhaps, or another means of entry." He scanned the room, his gaze settling on a small window, its latch secure but its frame slightly warped, as if it had been opened recently. The drapes were undisturbed, but a faint draught stirred the air. Mrs. Hargreaves gasped, her shawl slipping. Another attack. "Oh, Mr. Poirot, this place is cursed." First the Colonel, now poor Eleanor. Julian Fairchild lit a cigarette, his smirk gone, his eyes wary. A locked room sounds like someone's playing games, or covering their tracks. Dr. Sinclair knelt beside Eleanor, her clinical gaze assessing the bruise. "It's superficial, but she's in shock. She needs rest." She glanced at Poirot, her voice low. "This is no random assault. Someone meant to frighten her. Worse." Poirot's moustache quivered. "Precisement, madame. This is no coincidence. The Colonel's murder, the missing letter, and now this a pattern emerges. Mademoiselle Vance, did you see anything of your attacker? A glimpse, a voice?" Eleanor shook her head, her voice barely audible. "It was too quick. They wore dark clothes. I think a man, but I'm not sure. I heard them mutter something. 'Keep quiet,' or something like it." "Keep quiet," Poirot repeated, his mind racing. The phrase echoed the whispered conversation in the East Wing. The blackmail, notes, threat. He turned to the group, his voice sharp. "Mes amis, this is no isolated act. Someone seeks to enforce silence, to protect a secret. Who among you has a key to this room?" Carstairs cleared his throat. "Only the housekeeper, sir, and myself. The keys are kept in the servants' quarters, locked away." Vehement. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And yet, a locked room is breached, and a clue is left behind." He held up the torn fabric, its dark wool catching the light. It belongs to someone here. A jacket perhaps, or a coat. I ask you now, who was in the East Wing this afternoon?" The guests exchanged glances, their silences heavy with accusation. Mrs. Hargreaves stammered, "I was in the conservatory, reading. I saw no one." Julian exhaled a plume of smoke, his tone sharp. "I was in my room, napping." "You're barking up the wrong tree." Dr. Sinclair adjusted her spectacles. "I was in the library, reviewing some old medical journals, alone." Poirot's gaze lingered on Julian, noting the faint scent of tobacco on the fabric, similar to his cigarettes. "Monsieur Fairchild, you're smoking. It is a habit most distinctive. This fabric, it carries a trace of your brand." Nan. Julian's eyes flashed, but he recovered quickly. "Plenty of people smoke, Poirot. Don't pin this on me because of a scrap of cloth." Eleanor's voice cut through, sharp with fear. "It could have been you, Julian. You were near the library last night, and now this. Why won't you admit it?" Mrs. Hargreaves gasped, her voice shrill. "Oh, Julian, say it isn't so. You're a gentleman, not a ruffian." Dr. Sinclair's lips twitched. "Let's not jump to conclusions. But Mr. Poirot, the precision of this attack, quick, calculated, suggests someone with experience, perhaps military, like the Colonel." The accusation hung in the air, and Julian's smirk vanished. "You're reaching, Doctor. I'm no soldier, and I'm no thug." Poirot raised a hand, his voice calm but commanding. "Calm, mes amis. The accusations, they multiply, but the truth, it lies in the details. A locked room, a torn fabric, a whispered threat, these are pieces of a puzzle, and Hercule Poirot, he will solve it. He turned to Carstairs. Monsieur, ensure Mademoiselle Vance is cared for. And this room, it must be sealed, like the library. No one enters without my permission. As Carstairs escorted Eleanor to the housekeeper's care, the other guests dispersed, their faces taut with suspicion. Poirot lingered, his eyes tracing the room's contours. The warped window, the intact lock, the torn fabric all pointed to a calculated act, not a random assault. The attacker had entered and left without force, suggesting access, knowledge, or cunning, and the phrase "keep quiet" linked this incident to the Colonel's murder. The blackmail letter, the scandal of 1915. Poirot stepped to the window, peering into the grounds. The fog had lifted, but a shadow moved near the oak trees, fleeting. As before, Sir Reginald's absence gnawed at him, a silence louder than the guests. Was the host orchestrating this, or was he another victim? The little grey cells churned, piecing together the locked room riddle, the blackmail, the murder. The truth was close, hidden behind the Manor's oppressive silence, but Poirot's resolve was unyielding. He would break that silence, and the secrets would spill forth. Chapter 10. The price revealed. The late afternoon light filtered through the heavy drapes of Blackthorn Manor, casting a pallor over the drawing-room where Hercule Poirot stood, his small frame radiating an authority that belied his stature. The events of the day, Colonel Rutherford's murder, the missing blackmail letter, Eleanor Vance's attack in a locked room, had woven a tapestry of intrigue, each thread marked by silence and deception. The police were still delayed. The fog, having cleared only to reveal the Manor's isolation, and Sir Reginald Ashburn's absence, loomed like a spectre. Poirot's little grey cells were alight, piecing together the clues, the torn ledger page, the whispered threats, the torn fabric, and the scrawled note, the prices paid. The truth was near, and Poirot was determined to uncover it. He had summoned the guests once more, their faces a gallery of tension and dread. Eleanor Vance, her cheek still bruised, sat with a shawl draped over her shoulders, her eyes haunted. Mrs. Lavinia Hargreaves clutched her laced shawl, her nervous chatter replaced by a strained silence. Julian Fairchild leaned against the mantel, his cigarette smoke curling upward, his nonchalance a thin veneer over unease. Dr. Evelyn Sinclair sat with her hands folded, her spectacles glinting, her expression unreadable. Carstairs stood by the door, his butler's composure fraying at the edges. "Miss Amos," Poirot began, his voice smooth but piercing. "The silence of Blackthorn Manor, it is a shield, but it cracks under the weight of truth. Colonel Rutherford was murdered, Mademoiselle Vance attacked, a letter vanished, a scandal hidden. But now, Hercule Poirot sees the heart of this mystery, blackmail, tied to a financial empire, and a betrayal that threatens ruin. Let us speak plainly, Eng." Mrs. Hargreaves gasped, her shawl slipping. "Blackmail? Oh, Mr. Poirot, what a dreadful word. Surely you don't think—" "I think, Madame," Poirot interrupted, his eyes gleaming, "that Colonel Rutherford was entangled in a secret from 1915, when this manor was a convalescent home, a scandal involving Captain Fairchild, a traitor who profited from the war, and you were connected to this truth." Julian's cigarette paused mid-air, his voice sharp. "You're dredging up old wounds, Poirot. My cousin's disgrace is no secret. What's it got to do with now?" Poirot turned to him, his moustache twitching. "Everything, Monsieur Fairchild. The ledger. It speaks of funds, Sir Reginald's funds, Madame Hargreaves' donations, Dr. Sinclair's treatment tied to Captain Fairchild's dealings. But there is more. I have found evidence. In the study, a letter hidden in a false drawer, not the one stolen, but another." He produced a folded paper, its edges yellowed, its script faded, but legible. "This letter, it is from Sir Reginald, to Colonel Rutherford, dated 1920. It speaks of a debt, a sum of £10,000, to be paid to keep a secret silent. The secret, a financial empire built on stolen war profits, laundered through this manor, implicating all who were here." Eleanor's hands trembled, her voice a whisper. 10,000. That's what the note said, the one you found in the East Wing. "Precisement, Mademoiselle," Poirot said. "The fragment, demand 10,000, or the truth." It was a demand to renew that silence. Colonel Rutherford, he refused to pay now, or perhaps he was the one demanding. threatening to expose the truth. Dr. Sinclair's lips tightened, her voice cool. "You're suggesting the Colonel was blackmailing us, or that one of us was blackmailing him. That's a bold leap, Mr. Poirot, without proof." "Proof?" Madame Poirot's eyes sparkled. "The proof, it is in your silences, your glances, your lies. The torn fabric from Mademoiselle Vance's attacker carries the scent of Monsieur Fairchild's cigarettes. The ledger's missing page, it was torn by someone who knew its contents, and the locked room, it was no mystery, a hidden passage, perhaps known to those familiar with the manor." Mrs. Hargreaves' voice rose, shrill with panic. "A hidden passage? Oh heavens, this place is full of secrets. But I swear, I knew nothing of blackmail. I gave money to help the wounded, nothing more." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "My mother, she warned me about this place. She said Sir Reginald was kind, but his wealth came from shadows. I thought she meant the war, but now—" Julian scoffed, but his hand shook, ash falling to the rug. "You're spinning a tale, Poirot. My cousin's mess was his own. I'm not part of some grand conspiracy." Poirot's gaze swept the room, his voice soft but unyielding. "Nan, monsieur, but you are part of this. The financial empire, it was Sir Reginald's, built on Captain Fairchild's profits, protected by silence. Colonel Rutherford, he was the guardian of that silence, until he broke it or threatened to. Someone ensured he paid the price, and Mademoiselle Vance, she was warned to keep quiet." Dr. Sinclair leaned forward, her tone measured. "If Sir Reginald's wealth is the issue, why is he absent? Surely he'd be here to protect his interests." "A fine question, Madame," Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. "Sir Reginald, he invites Hercule Poirot, then vanishes. Perhaps he fears the truth, or perhaps he orchestrates this drama. But the letter, it reveals the price. £10,000, a fortune to bury a scandal that could ruin you all your reputations, your fortunes, your futures." The room fell silent. The fire's crackle a stark contrast to the guests' tension. Eleanor's handkerchief was a crumpled mass. Mrs. Hargreaves' shawl lay forgotten on the floor. Julian's cigarette burned to a stub, and Dr. Sinclair's fingers gripped her chair. Carstairs, at the door, shifted slightly, his eyes avoiding Poirot's mise. Miss Poirot continued. "The blackmail, it is the heart of this mystery. Colonel Rutherford's death, Mademoiselle Vance's attack, the missing letter, all are acts to protect this secret. But who demanded the price, and who paid with blood? Speak, or the little grey cells, they will speak for you." No one answered. Their silences a wall of defiance. Mrs. Hargreaves stammered, I know nothing of this. I'm just a widow, trying to do good." Eleanor's voice broke. "I didn't want this. I only came because Sir Reginald asked. My mother's warnings, I should have listened." Julian's eyes flashed. "Enough, Poirot. You've got no proof, just old letters and guesses. You're stirring up trouble for nothing." Dr. Sinclair's voice was calm but sharp. "If there's a passage, Mr. Poirot, find it. Prove your theory, or stop accusing us." Poirot smiled, a small, knowing curve of his lips. "Patience, madame. The truth, it reveals itself in time. The passage, I shall find it. The letter, it will resurface. And the blackmailer or their victim will not escape." Hercule Poirot, as the guests dispersed, their faces etched with fear and mistrust, Poirot lingered, the letter from 1920 in his hand. The financial empire, built on betrayal, was the motive, but the players remained elusive. Was Rutherford the blackmailer, silenced for his demands, or the victim, refusing to pay? The attack on Eleanor suggested a desperate act to maintain silence, but the locked room and the torn fabric pointed to someone within the manor, someone who knew its secrets. Outside, the grounds were clear, but a shadow flickered near the gate, fleeting as a ghost. Sir Reginald's absence was no accident, Poirot sensed, and the truth lay hidden in the manor's walls, waiting for his little grey cells to uncover it. Chapter 11. The False Confession. The evening shadows lengthened across Blackthorn Manor, their dark fingers creeping through the drawing-room where Hercule Poirot stood, his small frame a beacon of calm amid the storm of suspicion. The day had been a cascade of revelations: Colonel Rutherford's murder, Eleanor Vance's attack in a locked room, the missing blackmail letter, and the 1920 letter tying the guests to a financial scandal from 1915. The police were still delayed, the fog's remnants lingering in the manor's isolation, and Sir Reginald Ashburn's absence remained a maddening enigma. Poirot's little grey cells were alight, sifting through the cluster-torn fabric, the whispered threats, the ledger's missing page, and now a new development was about to test his deductive prowess. The guests had gathered at Poirot's insistence, their faces drawn with exhaustion and fear. Eleanor Vance sat near the fire, her bruise fading but her eyes haunted, her shawl pulled tight. Mrs. Lavinia Hargreaves fidgeted with a lace handkerchief, her mauve dress crumpled, her usual chatter silenced. Julian Fairchild leaned against the mantel, his cigarette smoke curling upward, his eyes wary but defiant. Dr. Evelyn Sinclair sat with her hands folded, her spectacles glinting, her composure a thin veneer over tension. Carstairs stood by the door, his butler's mask slipping, revealing a flicker of unease. Poirot paced slowly, his polished shoes silent on the Persian rug, his hands clasped behind his back. "Mies Amos," he began, his voice smooth but commanding. "The web of secrets in Blackthorn Manor grows tighter. A murder, an attack, a blackmail scheme tied to a financial empire. Each of you is bound to this truth. Yet you hide behind silence. But now, the time for silence is over. The little grey cells, they demand the truth." Before anyone could respond, Mrs. Hargreaves rose, her handkerchief falling to the floor, her voice trembling but resolute. "Mr. Poirot, I can't bear it any longer. I did it. I killed Colonel Rutherford." A stunned silence gripped the room. The fires crackled, the only sound. Eleanor gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Julian's cigarette paused mid-air, his eyes narrowing. Dr. Sinclair's spectacles glinted as she leaned forward, her expression unreadable. Carstairs shifted, his gaze fixed on the floor. Poirot's moustache twitched, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of surprise and skepticism. "Vraiment, Madame Hargreaves, you confess to murder. This is most unexpected. Tell me, how did you do it, and why?" Mrs. Hargreaves' plump cheeks flushed, her voice wavering. "It was in the library. I was desperate. The Colonel, he was blackmailing me about the money I gave in 1915. He said he'd expose me, ruin my family's name. I found a letter opener on the desk, and I struck him. I didn't mean to kill him, only to stop him." Poirot's eyebrows arched, his tone gentle but probing. "A letter opener, Madame, interesting, and yet no such weapon was found. The wound, it was precise, like a surgical blade. Nan. And the letter, it vanished. Tell me, how did you enter the locked library, and what of this letter opener?" Mrs. Hargreaves faltered, her hands twisting together. I don't know about the letter. I was so frightened, I must have dropped it. The door, it was open, I think. I don't remember clearly." "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, his eyes never leaving her face. "A confession, it is a heavy thing, madame, but it must hold the weight of truth. Your story, it has holes, Eng. The library was locked, as Carstairs confirmed. The wound, it was not the work of a letter opener. And your manner, it betrays fear, not guilt." Mrs. Hargreaves sank back into her chair, tears welling. I thought if I confessed, this would end. I can't bear the suspicion, the fear. But I swear, I didn't kill him." Eleanor's voice broke the silence, sharp with accusation. "Then why confess, Mrs. Hargreaves? Are you protecting someone, or hiding something else?" Julian scoffed, his smirk returning but strained. "She's covering her tracks, or someone else's. Come on, Poirot, you don't buy this, do you?" Dr. Sinclair's tone was cool, analytical. "A false confession is a classic tactic to deflect suspicion, but it raises questions, Mr. Why would Mrs. Hargreaves lie, unless she knows more than she's told us?" Poirot raised a hand, his voice calm but unyielding. "Calm, Mies Amos. A confession, true or false, it reveals much. Madame Hargreaves, you speak of blackmail, of fear for your family's name. This is tied to 1915. The financial empire, built on Captain Fairchild's betrayal, funded by your donations, protected by silence. But why confess now, unless to shield another or to bury a greater truth?" Mrs. Hargreaves sobbed, her voice muffled. "I just wanted it to stop. The Colonel, he was asking questions, stirring up the past. I thought, if I took the blame, it would end." Poirot's eyes gleamed, his mind racing. The confession was a deception. He was certain, but it was not without purpose. Mrs. Hargreaves' fear was genuine, but her story was a patchwork of lies, designed to obscure rather than reveal. He turned to the group, his voice sharp. "Mies, Amos, the truth. It is close. The Colonel's death, Mademoiselle Vance's attack, the missing letter all point to a secret you all share. Someone seeks to keep it buried, even at the cost of blood. But who? Julian exhaled a plume of smoke, his tone biting. You're fishing, Poirot. If Hargreaves wants to play martyr, let her. Doesn't mean she's guilty or that I am. Eyes flashed. You're quick to point fingers. Julian, that fabric I tore from my attacker, it smelled of your cigarettes. Care to explain that? Julian's smirk faltered, his hand shaking slightly. Coincidence. Plenty of people smoke, as I told Poirot. Dr. Sinclair adjusted her spectacles, her voice measured. And yet, Mr. Fairchild, your cousin's disgrace in 1915 implicates you by association. Perhaps the Colonel was threatening to expose a family secret. Carstairs, silent until now, cleared his throat. If I may, sir, the staff have been questioned, as you requested. None saw anyone near Miss Vance's room or the library. Poirot's gaze flicked to the butler, noting the slight tremor in his hands. Mercy, Monsieur Carstairs. But the Manor, it holds secret passages, perhaps, known to those who serve here long. The locked room, it was no mystery to someone with such knowledge. The room grew still. The fire's crackle, a stark contrast to the guests' tension. Mrs. Hargreaves' sobs subsided, but her eyes remained downcast. Eleanor clutched her shawl. Julian lit another cigarette, and Dr. Sinclair's fingers tightened on her chair. Poirot's little grey cells churned, piecing together the false confession, the torn fabric, the hidden passage. Mrs. Hargreaves was protecting someone. But who, and why? Mies Amos, Poirot said, his voice soft but commanding. The false confession, it is a shield, but it cracks under scrutiny. The truth lies in the details. A precise wound, a missing letter, a locked room breached. Hercule Poirot will find the passage, the weapon, the motive, and the silence. It will break. As the guests dispersed, their faces etched with fear and mistrust, Poirot lingered, his notebook open. Mrs. Hargreaves' confession was a diversion, but it revealed a deeper fear of exposure, of ruin. The scandal of 1915, the financial empire, the blackmailer were converging, and the truth was within reach. Outside, the grounds were darkening, but no shadow moved near the oaks. Sir Reginald's absence was a puzzle, but Poirot's resolve was unshaken. The little grey cells would unravel this riddle, and the false confession would lead him to the killer. Chapter 12. The Gathering Storm. The twilight cast an eerie glow over Blackthorn Manor, its ancient stones absorbing the fading light, as if guarding the secrets within. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand hall, his small frame dwarfed by the towering portraits of Ashburn ancestors, their stern gazes mirroring the tension that gripped the house. The events of the past 2 days, Colonel Rutherford's murder, Eleanor Vance's attack, the missing blackmail letter, Mrs. Hargreaves' false confession, had woven a web of deception, and Poirot's little grey cells were alight, piecing together the final threads. The police were due to arrive at last, but Poirot knew the truth could not wait. The storm was gathering, and the killer, still hidden, was growing desperate. The guests had been summoned to the drawing room, their faces etched with dread and exhaustion. Eleanor Vance sat by the fire, her bruise fading but her eyes haunted, her shawl clutched tightly. Mrs. Lavinia Hargreaves, her mauve dress rumpled, twisted a lace handkerchief, her earlier hysterics subdued into a nervous silence. Julian Fairchild leaned against the mantel, his cigarette smoke curling upward, his nonchalance strained to breaking. Dr. Evelyn Sinclair sat erect, her spectacles glinting, her clinical detachment a mask for something deeper. Carstairs stood by the door, his butler's composure fraying, his hands clasped to hide a tremor. Sir Reginald Ashburn's absence remained a gaping wound in the mystery, and Poirot sensed it was no accident. Mies Amos, Poirot began, his voice smooth, but charged with authority. The silence of Blackthorn Manor, it is breaking. Colonel Rutherford's murder, Mademoiselle Vance's attack, the missing letter, the false confession all point to a secret from 1915. A financial empire built on betrayal, protected by blackmail. The truth, it is near we, but one of you, seeks to keep it buried, even at the cost of blood. Mrs. Hargreaves' handkerchief tore, a soft rip echoing in the stillness. Mr. Poirot, please, this is unbearable. I confess to stop this madness, but you say it's false. What more do you want from us? Poirot's moustache twitched, his eyes gleaming. The truth, madame. Your confession, it was a shield, Nan, to protect another, or to hide your own fear. But the little grey cells, they see through such deceptions. Let us review the facts. He paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. Colonel Rutherford, he was killed with a precise wound, no weapon found. A letter, hinting at blackmail, vanished from a locked library. Mademoiselle Vance, attacked in a locked room, tore a fabric smelling of tobacco, Monsieur Fairchild's tobacco. Perhaps a ledger page, torn, speaks of a scandal in 1915, and a letter from 1920 reveals a debt of £10,000 to keep it silent. And yet, our host, Sir Reginald, he remains absent. Why? Julian exhaled a plume of smoke, his voice sharp. You're circling, Poirot. If you think I'm the killer, say it. That fabric proves nothing. Half the manor smokes. Eleanor's voice trembled, her eyes flashing. But it was your brand, Julian, and you were near the library before the colonel died. Why won't you explain yourself? Julian's smirk faltered, his hands shaking. I told you, I was in the conservatory. You're desperate to pin this on someone, aren't you? Dr. Sinclair adjusted her spectacles, her tone cool. Mr. Poirot, the fabric is circumstantial, but the locked room, there must be a passage, as you suggested. Have you found it? Poirot's eyes narrowed. Patience, madame. The passage, it exists. This morning, I examined the east wing behind a tapestry in Mademoiselle Vance's room. A panel conceals a narrow stair leading to the library. Someone with knowledge of this manor used it to enter, to attack, to steal. A gasp rippled through the room. Mrs. Hargreaves' voice rose, shrill. A secret passage. Oh heavens, this place is a labyrinth of horrors. Eleanor's face paled. Then, my attacker knew the manor's secrets. But who? Sir Reginald. Carstairs. Carstairs stiffened, his voice steady but strained. I assure you, Miss Vance, I know of no such passage. My duties are to the household, not to its secrets. Poirot's gaze flicked to the butler, noting the slight tremor in his hands. Vraiment, Monsieur Carstairs. Yet you have served here since the war, Nan. You know the manor's ways, its hidden corners, and the keys, they are in your care. Carstairs' eyes darted away, but he said nothing. Poirot turned to the group, his voice sharp. The passage, it explains the locked room, but not the motive. The blackmail, it was the heart of this crime. Colonel Rutherford, he either demanded the price or refused to pay it, and someone in this room ensured his silence. Dr. Sinclair leaned forward, her voice measured. If the colonel was the blackmailer, his death benefits us all. But if he was the victim, then one of us is the blackmailer and the killer. Julian scoffed, but his eyes were wary. Nice theory, Doctor, but you are quick to point fingers. Maybe you know more about that passage than you let on. Eleanor's voice broke, her fear palpable. Stop it, all of you. My mother warned me about this place, about secrets that destroyed the colonel's death. My attack, it's all because of 1915, isn't it? Poirot nodded, his tone soft but unyielding. Precisement, mademoiselle. The scandal of 1915, Captain Fairchild's betrayal, Sir Reginald's empire, your mother's fear, Madame Hargreaves' funds, Dr. Sinclair's treatments, all are linked. The colonel, he broke the silence, or threatened to. And now, the killer, seeks to silence you all. The room grew still. The fire's crackle a stark contrast to the guests' tension. Mrs. Hargreaves' handkerchief was in tatters. Eleanor's shawl slipped to the floor. Julian's cigarette burned to a stub, and Dr. Sinclair's fingers gripped her chair. Carstairs stood rigid, his eyes fixed on the ground. Poirot's voice cut through the silence, commanding, Mies Amos, the storm gathers, and the truth will not wait. The passage, the fabric, the letters, they point to one among you. Speak now, or Hercule Poirot will reveal you. No one answered. Their silence is a wall of defiance. But Poirot's eyes missed nothing. Eleanor's trembling hands, Mrs. Hargreaves' pale face, Julian's clenched jaw, Dr. Sinclair's steady gaze, Carstairs' subtle flinch. The clues were aligning, the pattern emerging. The killer was close, their desperation palpable. And Poirot sensed the final confrontation was imminent. As the guests dispersed, their faces taut with fear and mistrust, Poirot lingered, his notebook open. He had found the passage confirmed, the blackmail, and unraveled the false confession. But the killer's identity remained shrouded, hidden behind the manor's oppressive silence. Outside, the twilight deepened, and a shadow moved near the oak trees, fleeting but deliberate. Sir Reginald's absence was no longer a mystery, Poirot suspected, but a key to the final revelation. He closed his notebook, his moustache quivering. With resolve, patience, Hercule Poirot, he thought. The storm breaks soon, and the truth will shine like lightning. The little grey cells were ready, and the silence of Blackthorn Manor would soon be shattered. Chapter 13. The final unveiling. The night had fallen over Blackthorn Manor, its ancient walls steeped in a silence that seemed to pulse with anticipation. Hercule Poirot stood in the drawing-room, its fire casting flickering shadows across the faces of the assembled guests, who sat in a tense semicircle. The air was heavy with the weight of secrets unraveled over the past 2 days. Colonel Rutherford's murder, Eleanor Vance's attack, the missing blackmail letter, the false confession, and the hidden passage. The police were due at dawn, but Poirot could wait no longer. The little grey cells had pieced together the puzzle, and now, in this final gathering, he would unveil the truth, the killer, and a twist that would redefine the mystery. Eleanor Vance sat clutching her shawl, her bruise barely visible but her eyes wide with fear. Mrs. Lavinia Hargreaves twisted a new handkerchief, her mauve dress dishevelled, her face pale. Julian Fairchild leaned against the mantel, his cigarette unlit, his smirk replaced by a wary tension. Dr. Evelyn Sinclair sat erect, her spectacles glinting, her clinical calm a thin mask. Carstairs stood by the door, his butler's composure strained, his hands clasped tightly. And, at last, Sir Reginald Ashburn had appeared, summoned by a telegram found by Poirot in the study, his gaunt frame and sharp eyes commanding yet evasive mise. "Amos," Poirot began, his voice smooth but resonant. "The silence of Blackthorn Manor. It has spoken at last. Colonel Rutherford's murder, Mademoiselle Vance's attack, the missing letter, the scandal of 1915 all are pieces of a puzzle, and Hercule Poirot, he has solved it. Tonight, the truth will be unveiled, and the killer will face justice." Mrs. Hargreaves gasped, her handkerchief tearing. "Oh, Mr. Poirot, please, end this nightmare. Who did it?" Poirot's moustache twitched, his eyes gleaming. "Patience, madame. Let us reconstruct in 1915. This manor was a convalescent home. Captain Fairchild, he betrayed his country, selling supplies to the enemy, building a financial empire. For Sir Reginald, Colonel Rutherford, Clara Vance, Dr. Sinclair, and Madame Hargreaves, you were all here, bound by a promise of silence. A letter in 1920, it demanded £10,000 to keep that secret. But the Colonel, he grew restless, he threatened to expose the truth." Sir Reginald's voice was low, almost a growl. "Rutherford was a fool, stirring up old wounds. But murder, I had no part in that." Poirot's gaze fixed on him. "Vraiment, Sir Reginald, your absence, it was no accident. You invited Hercule Poirot, knowing a storm was brewing. Why?" Sir Reginald's eyes narrowed. "I heard rumours Rutherford was talking, demanding money. I thought you'd stop him, discreetly stop him." Poirot's tone was sharp. "Nan, you wished me to uncover the truth, or to be your shield. But let us proceed. The Colonel was killed in the library, a precise wound, no weapon found, a letter vanished, a page torn from the ledger. Mademoiselle Vance was attacked in a locked room, a passage used to enter. And Madame Hargreaves, she confessed, falsely, to protect another." Eleanor's voice trembled. "But who, Mr. Poirot? Who attacked me? Who killed the Colonel?" Poirot paced, his hands clasped behind his back. "The clues, they speak clearly. The torn fabric, it smelled of Monsieur Fairchild's tobacco, but it was a plant, a distraction. The passage, known to few, was used by someone intimate with the manor. The letter, it was not stolen, but destroyed to hide its contents. And the note, the prices paid, it was a message, not from the killer, but from the victim." Julian's eyes flashed, his voice sharp. "What? You're saying Rutherford wrote that himself?" "Precisement," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. "But let us come to the twist, Eng. The killer, they are not who you think. The scandal of 1915, it was not Captain Fairchild's alone. There was another, a silent partner, who orchestrated the betrayal, who profited most, and that person is Dr. Evelyn Sinclair." A gasp rippled through the room. Dr. Sinclair's spectacles glinted, her voice icy. "That's absurd, Poirot. I was a doctor, not a traitor. You have no proof." Poirot smiled, a small knowing curve of his lips. "Proof, madame. The little grey cells, they see all. In 1915, you were not merely treating patients, you facilitated Captain Fairchild's dealings, falsifying medical records to cover stolen supplies, channeling funds to Sir Reginald's empire. Rutherford discovered this, years later, and demanded payment to stay silent. You paid, until he asked for more £10,000, as the letter fragment showed. Dr. Sinclair's hands tightened, but she remained composed. Speculation. You can't prove I killed him. Nan Poirot's eyes gleamed. The wound, it was surgical, made with a scalpel, not a letter opener. You, a doctor, had such a tool. The passage, you knew it from your time here, using it to enter the library, to attack Mademoiselle Vance when she grew too curious about her mother's warnings. The letter, you destroyed it, but the fragment remained, and the fabric, you placed it, knowing Monsieur Fairchild's cigarettes would mislead. Eleanor's voice broke. But why me? Why attack me? Poirot's tone softened. Your mother, Clara, she knew Dr. Sinclair's role. She warned you to stay away, fearing the truth would resurface. When you came to Blackthorn, Dr. Sinclair feared you would uncover her past, so she struck to silence you. Julian scoffed, but his voice shook. And the note, you said Rutherford wrote it. Oui, Poirot said. The Colonel. He was dying, but he left a message. The price is paid. He meant his life. Paid to expose Dr. Sinclair. He knew she would kill him, and he invited me here, through Sir Reginald, to ensure justice. Sir Reginald's face darkened. I didn't know it was her. I thought Rutherford was the threat. Dr. Sinclair rose, her voice cold. This is nonsense. You've woven a story, Poirot, but there's no evidence. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Evidence, madame. In your room, hidden in a medical bag, I found the scalpel, stained with blood. Carstairs, he saw you near the passage last night, though he feared to speak. And the torn ledger page, I recovered it from the fire grate, its ashes revealing your name. Carstairs nodded, his voice low. It's true, sir. I saw her, but I was afraid. Dr. Sinclair's composure cracked, her voice rising. You can't prove it was me. Enough. Poirot's voice was a whip. You killed to protect your secret, but the silence, it betrays you. The little grey cells, they see the truth. Dr. Sinclair lunged toward the door, but Carstairs blocked her, his face resolute. The guests gasped, Eleanor sobbing, Mrs. Hargreaves fainting into her chair. Julian dropped his cigarette, his face pale. Sir Reginald stood, his voice heavy. It's over, Evelyn. Poirot's voice softened, but his eyes were unyielding. The price of silence, it was too high. Nan, justice will be served, and Blackthorn Manor will be silent no more. As the police arrived at dawn, Dr. Sinclair was taken away, her silence broken at last. The guests, their secrets exposed, faced their own reckonings. Poirot stood alone in the hall. The thorn encircled rose above the door, a reminder of the truth he had unveiled. The little grey cells had triumphed, and the mystery was solved, with a twist that redefined the past and a resolution that restored order.